Thanksgiving has always been more than just a date on the calendar for me. It was a time when, despite disagreements, arguments, and misunderstandings, we still gathered together, sat down at the same table, as if for one evening we were a family again. Maybe it was the idea itself, that we come to the hearth, leaving behind the grudges and distances, bringing with us plates, memories, and a desire to feel the warmth of past closeness, if only for a moment. Or maybe it was the food. My mother really knew how to cook so well that even the air seemed nourishing, especially her sweet potato casserole, warm, velvety, with a crispy crust and a subtle hint of cinnamon. It reminded me of childhood, comfort, and those times when I did not yet know that being an adult means constantly fighting, but that Thanksgiving was different, not like all the previous ones. Something about it was off from the very first moment I stepped through the door. I'd like to say I was shocked that it was so sudden and unexpected, but, if I'm honest with myself, I probably always knew it. Somewhere deep inside, I had a premonition. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My name is Carolyn Turner. I turned 34 last November. I'm a single mother. My son Jamie, my little light, my compass, and my quiet strength, was just starting first grade. Things weren't easy for us, but we held on, the two of us, as best we could. And even though I'd long since gotten used to being the one who didn't fit in, especially in my dad's eyes, I still found myself returning to that house in Charleston, South Carolina, every time, as if something was pulling me back, to my roots, to the past, to the home that, despite everything, was still a part of me. My parents' house is a true symbol of good old America, a huge porch that spans the entire front, where my mother still likes to drink coffee in the morning, wrapped in a blanket, heavy oak chests of drawers that are impossible to move, and portraits, a whole gallery of faces in the hallway, grandparents, uncles, cousins, silent witnesses of all our family celebrations and disasters. In the fall, it smells especially magical. Cinnamon, fir branches, a pinch of nutmeg and the heat of wood from the fireplace. I returned there not because it was easy for me, but rather because deep down I still hoped, what if this time everything would be different? That year, the house was crowded. My brother Lucas came from Charlotte with his perfect wife Olivia and their 5-year-old twins Amelia and Jack. These two could create chaos in a couple of minutes in a way that no adult, even in a fit of anger, could do. They were running around the rooms, laughing, hiding behind the curtains, and Mom was just managing to wipe away the marker stains and pick up the scattered toys. She was on the move from the very morning, setting the table, setting out the dinnerware, the ones that were only taken out on big holidays, checking that everyone had their own place setting, their own glass. I knew how much order meant to her. The logs were crackling in the fireplace, the air was thick with the aroma of turkey, pie crusts and something else sweet that was baking in the oven, but underneath all this warmth and comfort there was a trembling sense of anxiety. As if it was all too carefully calibrated, like a mask pulled over someone else's face. I felt it right away. Everything seemed to be in slow motion, smiles too wide, glances too quick, and no one spoke directly. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we finally sat down at the table. Jamie had put on his clean blue collared shirt, so cute that I almost cried when he said, "Mom, I'm going to be a grown-up today." Of course, by the time we said our prayers, he'd spilled cranberry sauce on it, leaving a scarlet stain right in the middle of his chest. I couldn't help but smile. How could you not love him? I sat him at the small card table a little to the side, where he could feel independent but still close, and I took my place next to Mom at the big table. Conversations were awkward and halting. Olivia talked about soccer practice, about how Amelia caught the best pass. Lucas proudly mentioned his new promotion at the bank, his voice a little louder than usual, with a hint of importance. Dad chuckled silently, not even looking up from his plate. I tried to lighten the mood by telling him about how Jamie had tried to coax the neighbor's dog into getting into the bathtub with him the other day, and to my horror, the dog had almost agreed. It was a really funny story, and I knew how to tell it, but no one at the table laughed. Only my mother cast a quick, nervous glance at my father, as if checking something out. The tension hung in the air like an electric blanket. I looked away and watched Jamie. He was sitting on the carpet, driving his truck back and forth in a pattern, perfectly happy in his own little world, free of all these adult tensions. The twins were giggling at some joke. Lucas was checking his phone, probably the score of the game, and I even managed to switch off from everything for a few minutes to think about how I had been through worse, and I would survive this. But then it happened. Dad slammed his fist down on the table with a sharp, hard thump, everything shook, Mom's glass tipped over, scarlet wine spilling like blood onto the blindingly white tablecloth. The room went deafeningly quiet, and I felt everything inside me tighten. My heart started beating faster, but my body seemed to turn to stone. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He stood up and looked straight at me, cold, heavy. "You're a disgrace, Caroline," he said, and it was all there. His anger, his disappointment, his fear. "Maybe, a single mother, why can't you be normal like everyone else?" His voice was like a gunshot, loud and harsh and ringing in my ears. It echoed off the walls, penetrating deep into me. For a moment, no one at the table moved. Olivia's eyes, always serene and adorned with perfect winged lines, suddenly widened as if a wind had suddenly hit them and there was no escape, and even Lucas, who rarely lost his composure, shifted uncomfortably, as if he'd been hit personally. Jamie, not understanding the meaning but instantly catching the atmosphere, stopped playing, froze with the truck in his hand, and looked up at me with his deep, brown eyes, too big and serious for a 7-year-old boy. I felt the heat creep up my skin, my pulse pound in my temples, and the blood rush to my face, making my cheeks burn, but I tried my best to hold on, to breathe evenly, not to let the trembling betray either confusion or resentment. This was not the first time that my father lost control of himself, directing all his anger and disappointment at me, but before he always chose the moment when he could do it alone, behind a closed door or in the hallway, in a whisper, with venom in his voice. Now it was as if he wanted the whole world, or at least the whole street, to hear his scream. "We gave you everything," he thundered, raising his voice with new strength, "and you just threw it all away, as if it wasn't worth a dime." He spoke louder and louder, with each phrase as if stretching a taut string that everyone else was afraid to disturb. His face flushed crimson, the veins in his neck bulged, and he continued to hurl accusations at me, as if he hoped that if he hit me hard enough with words, I would cave. "You could have a normal life like everyone else," he shouted, "but you chose this. You embarrass us every time you show up on this doorstep, every time." I looked for my mother, perhaps for some tiny bit of support that I so desperately needed at that moment, but she only looked down, staring at her lap, as if there was some place to hide from what was happening there. In the folds of the cloth napkin, she fiddled with it with her fingers, pale as paper, and kept her eyes downcast. Lucas opened his mouth slightly, as if he wanted to intervene, to say something, even a word, but then he closed his lips again, focusing on the untouched mashed potatoes on the plate, as if they demanded more attention than all the words floating around the room. Meanwhile, I was remembering everything I had done for them. Everything they had never even suspected, the secret transfers that went toward the mortgage when Dad suddenly stopped paying and Mom was afraid they would lose their home, the money invested in Lucas's law school when he couldn't get accredited without help, that SUV that was now sitting in their driveway, the one Dad had so proudly shown off to his friends at Sunday barbecues. It was all thanks to me, but no one, not a single one of them, knew. They believed it was all the fruits of Dad's retirement savings, his sound investments, as he liked to say, and I let them believe it, because it was easier. He spoke again, louder, hoarse and shaking, almost losing his composure. His face was even redder, as if his blood was boiling. He leaned down, close enough to me that I could smell his cologne on my cheek, the same one he had used my entire life. "Get out," he hissed, "you are no longer needed here. Come back when you have straightened out your life and stopped dragging us all down." I stood up, my hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists at my sides so no one would see. My voice in my throat was weak but firm. "Okay," I said quietly, almost a whisper. There was nothing more to say, all the important words had already been said, even if not out loud. I turned to Jamie, who was crying, his lips trembling, and his hands were reaching out to me. I picked him up, hugged him, feeling him tremble with fear and confusion, and whispered softly in his ear, "It's okay, baby, we're leaving, it's going to be okay." We headed for the hallway. I grabbed our coats, one after the other. I helped him into the puffy, warm jacket, zipped it up, pulled the hood up. I picked up my bag, glanced at the table, at the faces frozen in silence. No one said a word, no one tried to stop me, no one even stood up. The November air stung my face as I stepped out the door, cold and damp, smelling of leaves and smoke. I walked down the porch steps, my heels clicking on the old wood, and walked to my car, parked at the curb. Jamie walked beside me, clutching his toy truck to his chest as if it were a shield from whatever had just happened. I buckled him into the booster seat, adjusted the belt, took one last look at the house, lit by the soft light from within, with its gable, its garlanded columns, and the windows where the people I once called family still sat. But a strange feeling settled in me, not longing, not pain, it was something else, freedom. I felt truly free. They didn't know. None of them knew that this entire world they lived in was built on my shoulders, my efforts, my work, my blood, the house, the cars, even the food they crunched on at the table. All of it came from the empire I'd built, the $94 million empire none of them had ever thought to ask about. For years, I'd let them think I was a failure, that I was broken, that I was their shadow, incapable of anything serious. It had been easier that way, less talking, fewer questions. But now, as I walked away from those who carried my blood but never knew my heart, I felt the weight lift. I took my first real deep breath. Thanksgiving had always been about family. That day, I realized that true strength comes from being able to walk away when the place you call home stops being home. The truth was, they never knew me, even when I lived under the same roof with them, when I visited them for holidays, when I brought gifts for birthdays and sat at this very table. I always felt like I was living in someone else's life, in a role that was imposed on me. I saw it in my mother's glances, how she looked at me with slight anxiety when I laughed too loudly or talked about new deals, about partners, about the office in New York. I saw it in Lucas's strained questions, who always remained polite, but never asked with genuine interest, "How are you doing, sister?" To them, I was the girl who always did something wrong, as if I was wearing clothes that weren't my size, too loose or too restrictive, the one who always deviated from the family's course, didn't fit into the patterns they had outlined, as if the rules by which the Turner family lived were carved in stone and any step aside was perceived as betrayal. I was the woman who came home not with flowers and confessions, but with a child in her arms and without a husband by her side, a woman who always had too many bold ideas and not enough patience to explain them to those who didn't want to listen. It was easier for them to see me as a failure than to try to discern something greater behind my independence, something significant, requiring strength, determination and sacrifice. My family either didn't understand, or perhaps deliberately avoided understanding, that every late-night email I sent, every call I took sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, trying not to wake Jamie, every trip I took to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles with one small suitcase and a head full of plans, none of this was an escape, not an empty rush, but the building blocks of something that over time became far more durable than any family tradition. I knew from the start that my ambitions were unwelcome in this house, so I learned to hide them, not to talk about them, not to brag, not to argue. I hid my ideas behind a mask of modesty, pretending that my successes were just luck, chance, just plain good fortune, when in fact my world, calm on the surface, was a hive of work, fuss, strategy, dreams that I realized at night. It all started 5 years ago, in a small, leaky apartment on the outskirts of Denver, where a draft blew across the floor and the wallpaper was peeling from the walls. I was 29 then, I was newly married, carrying Jamie, and trying to figure out how to get through the next month with only enough money in the bank to cover 2 rent payments. It was raining that day, so much so that it seemed to be trying to blur time itself. I was sitting at an old kitchen table with scuffed legs, a used laptop in front of me, and a notebook covered from cover to cover with ideas, calculations, and small hopes. It was on that day that Blue Harbor was born, an online platform for independent American artists and designers, a place where art became accessible and creators could find their voice. I gave it this name in honor of the imaginary shore that I imagined in my mind as a child, a safe harbor where anything was possible. I worked day and night, mastered web design on free forums, looked for artists, called, begged, convinced, wrote product descriptions until late at night, while Jamie peacefully snored in a crib nearby. The first year was insanely hard. Sometimes I ate pasta for 4 days in a row to have enough for diapers, glued packages myself, delivered orders myself, took calls from clients myself. I watched hundreds of YouTube videos, learned about marketing, customer service, accounting, taxation. Every day was a lesson, And I made a ton of mistakes, stupid, offensive, sometimes ones that made me want to cry. But I was never afraid of making mistakes, I was afraid to stop, so I kept going, step by step. Gradually, everything began to change. At first, there were rare reviews, grateful letters, small repeat orders. Then one day, a popular blog dedicated to lifestyle and sustainable consumption wrote an article about Blue Harbor. And that was the beginning of an avalanche. Orders poured in so fast that I didn't have time to unpack the boxes. I invested every penny into developing the site, hired 2 assistants who came to my home office for a few hours a day, and started working with suppliers, creating a line of home goods to order. Then letters came from New York, offers from boutiques in Los Angeles, interest from large retailers. They started offering me partnerships, and I finally allowed myself to believe that this was not an accident, but the fruits of my labor. I always negotiated decisively, without unnecessary softness. I knew what I wanted, and most importantly, what I did not want. I was not going to give up control. I listened to my instincts, like to old friends, and I was almost never wrong. And so, step by step, in 3 years, Blue Harbor ceased to be just a hobby project. It became a full-fledged empire. I made deals with American tech corporations that wanted to place our digital prints in their headquarters, and fashion houses in Paris and London invited me to create joint collections. And I flew to meetings in offices with panoramic windows and in dusty old mansions where it smelled of coffee and fabrics, and always pretended that I was just a freelancer, an assistant, an administrator, anything, just not to admit that I was the same Carolyn Turner, the founder and CEO of Blue Harbor. My fortune grew quickly, almost alarmingly. By last year, it had reached $94 million. Sometimes I would look at my bank statements with a slight shudder, as if it could all disappear in an instant, like a dream. But even then, I didn't allow myself to change. I still lived in the apartment I loved for its light and wood floors. I still wore the old down jacket I'd worn to walks in the park with Jamie. I still baked cookies on weekends and sat in the evenings with a notebook in my hand, coming up with new ideas, not because I needed to save money, but because I knew that true strength came from being yourself, even when the whole world told you that you were someone else. I had never been one for luxury, and despite the millions in my accounts, I kept my old SUV, dark gray, with a scuffed driver's seat and a baby car seat stained with juice and cookies, because it was part of my history, like an old blanket or a favorite cracked teacup. And I still wore the same jeans I'd worn to my first artist meetings and the soft cardigans I'd bought back when every purchase had to be carefully considered. I still picked up the phone when my mother called and said hi in a voice like I was 17, sitting on the floor in my pajamas with the phone cord wrapped around my neck. I remember shortly after Blue Harbor launched, when the money was just coming in, I quietly bought our family home in Charleston, the one with the porch and the scent of pine and cinnamon and the heavy furniture where I never belonged, and I did it without my mom knowing it was me. I did the deal through a proxy and let her believe the mortgage was paid by an anonymous donor from my dad's church group. She didn't ask too many questions, like she always did. Every month, I wired Lucas more than enough to pay off his student loans and then some, because I knew how hard it was for him to achieve the success and status he'd worked so hard to build. The money was funneled through a shell company registered to my accountant, and Lucas never doubted that it was just a smart investment from some friend or old colleague. Even their trips to Paris, the ones he would tell me about every Christmas with a gleam in his eye, peppering his sentences with French words he had learned on excursions, I paid for those too. My accountant was instructed to make sure that no one, not in any report, not in any line, would find connections that could lead to me. Sometimes I wonder if they should have told the truth. Maybe if they had known whose hands had really built their comfort, their attitude towards me would have changed. Maybe my father would have looked at me differently, my mother with pride instead of cautious politeness, and even Lucas would have found something to say other than polite phrases about being busy at work. But the point is that no one tried to find out, no one asked a single question. They simply assumed. Some believed that everything was paid for by my father's pension, some decided that Lucas had influential friends at the bank, and I let them believe it, partly because I had gotten used to it, and partly because I was tired of being the one who wasn't seen, the one who was treated like an inconvenient truth best left unsaid. That's why, when I got home after that disastrous Thanksgiving, to my own real apartment, the one with the art I'd chosen on the walls and the air that wasn't thick with the anticipation of criticism. I didn't feel sad, I felt angry. Jamie was asleep in the back seat, his cheek pressed against the blanket, the tears of domestic chaos still wet on his face. I carefully moved him to bed, covered him with a blanket, kissed his forehead, and it wasn't until the door to his room closed that I felt something inside me begin to shift. I sat down at my laptop, and for the first time all day my hands weren't shaking. I logged into my personal financial system. Scrolling through the transactions that were painfully familiar, every payment, every line item, the monthly transfers to the account that paid off the mortgage in Charleston, the money sent to Lucas, the utility bills, my mom's insurance, the maintenance on my dad's car, an entire life built on my shoulders, and yet, to them, I was still a mistake, a disappointment, a stain on their family that they tried to cover up with a veneer of propriety. I stared at the screen for a long moment, remembering every birthday I'd spent alone, every holiday dinner where my independence was turned into a joke, every smile that hid emptiness. And then I started canceling, slowly but surely. I paused the automatic payment on the mortgage, canceled the monthly transfer to Lucas, stopped payments to my mom. I wrote a letter to my lawyer asking him to cut off my access to the family trust. I called the bank and canceled my father's card, and I didn't flinch. At first, my chest felt cold, like I was stepping into ice water, but with each cancellation, with each line I crossed out, a new, sharp feeling grew inside me. Freedom. All these years, I had been their invisible support, the engine that they couldn't hear, but without which everything would stop. And finally, I realized that it was time to stop being a shadow, time to live by my own rules. No more free rides, no more silence. When the list was complete, I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My living room was silent, filled with golden light from the lamp, Jamie's boots in the corner, his drawings hanging on the refrigerator, and all of this was mine, built not in spite of, but because of. I realized that wherever I ended up next, I would take it with my head held high. I wasn't afraid anymore. I don't remember the details of the flight to Honolulu, only that I booked it the minute I finally severed the financial umbilical cord that connected me to my family. I needed a place where no one knew who I was, where no one expected me to explain, no one expected me to answer, just silence. I needed the ocean, I needed the sun, more than anything, I needed peace. The beach house was waiting for me, like an old friend no one knew existed, but who was always there, reliable and silent and warm. I'd bought it almost 2 years ago, right after Blue Harbor really took off, with that amazing, almost terrifying feeling you get when you first realize you have the opportunity to make a lifelong dream come true. Then I told my family that I had bought a modest company apartment near the airport, supposedly for business trips and meetings, and no one doubted it. No one asked to see photos or ask if I could take anyone with me. In fact, it was not just a place to live, it was a revelation, a house with high glass walls facing the ocean, modern, light, with floors that shimmered in the sunlight, like the sea surface at dawn. Palm trees grew along the edges of the property, their slender trunks barely rustling in the gusts of the coastal wind, and the building itself seemed to float above the sand, so clean that you wanted to walk on it barefoot and forget that you had ever worn shoes. It was the place I had dreamed of since my youth, secluded, warm, open, in which I could be only myself and belong only to myself. When Jamie and I landed, he was sleepy, his little head resting on my shoulder in the car on the way home from the airport, his breath warm and even and smelling a little of sweet juice and tiredness. But as soon as we pulled into the driveway and he saw the ocean, huge and alive and shimmering in the sun, his eyes lit up with joy, the purest joy that only a child can have. He whispered, "Mom, there's real sand outside our door," and before I could answer, he started clapping his hands. I couldn't help but smile. His excitement was infectious. I stood in the doorway and just watched him run around the spacious living room, throwing open each door like he was opening a treasure chest, and finally slipping out onto the back deck where the beach lay before us, long and white and as if it were just for us. The next morning, we were awakened by light. It didn't just creep into the bedroom, it poured, flooded the room, touched the face, awakening not from habit but from an inner sense that the day had begun not with anxiety but with hope. I got up quietly, so as not to wake Jamie, made coffee, and when I returned I saw him, his nose pressed to the glass, looking at the waves, fascinated. as if he were seeing them for the first time. "Can we go outside?" he asked, in a whisper. But there was real, genuine hope in that whisper. I nodded, still in my pajamas, and we carried our breakfast out on deck: buttered toast, fruit, and a small jug of orange juice. I wrapped myself in a blanket, settled myself on a lounge chair with a cup in my hands, and watched Jamie step barefoot onto the sand, dig his toes into the warm surface, and begin to build his first castle, with turrets, moats, and handprints. No one made comments, no one looked askance, no one asked why a child was playing before breakfast or why his mother was in her pajamas at 9 in the morning. There was only the sound of the surf, the faint smell of salt, the sun warming my shoulders, and Jamie's ringing laughter echoing across the deserted beach. Later that day, we walked along the beach. I walked slowly, breathing deeply, and Jamie ran ahead, collecting shells, pointing them out to me as if they were jewels, and chasing seagulls that screeched into the air as if they were playing with him. And in that moment, under the sun, under those light clouds, I suddenly realized how long it had been since I had felt truly relaxed. Something in my chest, clenched by years of worries, expectations, responsibilities, suddenly loosened, slowly, carefully, but noticeably. I wasn't performing in front of anyone, I wasn't apologizing for my decisions, I wasn't trying to live up to anyone's expectations except my own. Every now and then, I caught myself simply smiling. For no reason, just like that, and there was something so new about it that I laughed quietly. From surprise, from liberation, from the slight awkwardness of being happy for no reason. That night, when Jamie was curled up asleep, his hair still smelling of sun and salt and sea, I went out onto the balcony with a glass of white wine. The air was thick and warm, filled with the scent of blooming hibiscus and freshly picked plumeria, and the ocean outside sang its endless song, the kind you can only hear when your heart is ready to listen. I watched the sun sink slowly into the water, painting the sky in shades of purple, orange, gold, and thought about everything that had passed, about the years I gave to others, about the nights I stayed awake, working, hoping it all made sense, about the moments I missed with Jamie, the first words, the first steps, the first fears he experienced without me because I had to build, about the parts of myself I hid, prioritizing peace, stability, family, even if I was a stranger in it. But here, in this house, on this sand, under this sky, where nothing was expected of me, I suddenly began to remember who I was: not just a mother, not just a misunderstood daughter, not just a mysterious philanthropist, but a woman with her own dreams, her own desires, her own lost and found parts. I began to write again, not for work, not out of duty, not because something was expected of me, but because the words that had been living under my skin for years had finally found their way out. They were short stories full of feeling, and poems whose rhythm I had once heard in my heart, when I still believed in the poetry of life. I pulled these lines out of myself, like old letters long hidden away, and reread them with trepidation. All those dreams I had once boxed up on a shelf, dreams put aside for the sake of growing my business, for Jamie, for the sake of survival, now whispered to me, "Come back." My notebook became my nightly companion. After Jamie had fallen asleep, my hair still smelling of sun and salt, I would sit by the window, look out at the ocean, and let myself write, about everything. The words poured out of me like water, flowed like a stream, refreshing the space inside me that I had kept dry for so long. Some nights I wrote about pain, about a heart broken so badly it felt like it had lost its shape forever. About disappointments, about loneliness that you can't escape even in a room full of people, and sometimes I wrote about hope, as timid as a sapling breaking through concrete. I wrote about the young girl I had once been, with dreams too big for the city she had been born in, and the woman I was becoming now, strong, calm, honest with myself, and with each passing day, more and more, I wondered, what if I could use all of this, my freedom, my resources, my pain, my experiences, for the benefit of others? I'd been living with this thought for a long time, ever since the day Jamie was born, and I'd looked at him and sworn I'd never let him feel what I felt: helpless, ashamed, alone. I'd remember myself scared, exhausted, but not giving up. I'd remember what it was like to be alone, when it felt like the whole world was conspiring against you, how hard it was to ask for help when you knew you'd be judged instead of supported, and I'd wanted more and more to do something that would make a real difference in someone's life, something that would be a haven, like this house had become mine. One afternoon, sitting on my porch, hearing Jamie's laughter coming from outside, that same ringing, happy laughter that filled the house like sunlight. I pulled out my notebook and began sketching out a plan for a charity. I called it Harbor of Hope because that's what it was supposed to be, a place where women like me could feel safe, heard, supported, not judged, a place where no questions were asked, no diagnoses were given, no labels were given, where they just helped. I decided to start with $1 million fund. It was enough money to not just launch beautiful initiatives, but to really change someone's reality. I wrote out the directions: emergency grants for housing, food, medicine, legal aid for those fighting for custody or facing injustice, childcare support so that women could work and study, scholarships so that mothers could finish college or get a new profession. I wrote letters to lawyers, consultants, tax officials. I asked questions, I delved, I learned all over again, only this time not for the money, but for the meaning, and with each step, with each plan, I felt stronger. This time, my money wasn't another lifeline for people who didn't even bother to say thank you. Now I was building something that would last, something that would live on even after I was gone. And the thought of women who might never know my name but who would one day receive help and not feel alone filled me with a deep, quiet joy. I could picture them, women walking down the street holding a child's hand, women opening a letter with good news, women who felt that someone had thought of them. Jamie and I had quietly fallen into the rhythm I dreamed of, the rhythm of a calm, beautiful life. Mornings would start on the beach, toast on the deck, wet bare feet on the wood floor, playing with shells, laughter. Days would be spent exploring the island, visiting villages, reading on the porch, cuddling as we walked. Evenings would be warm conversations, movies, books, whispers before bed. There was so much light in this house, so much silence and warmth, that sometimes I would stop and just breathe in the salt air, the smell of the ocean, the feel of Jamie's little hand in mine, and I knew, this is it, the place I was really meant to be, the life I had chosen. The pain of Thanksgiving still echoed within me. It hadn't gone away, no, but standing here, in front of this endless expanse of water, into which the sun sank every evening with a new song, I felt the pain recede, lose its strength. The voices of my family grew quieter, as if the ocean was carrying them away with its waves, breaking all the accusations, all the reproaches, all the omissions on the shore, and in their place, my own voice was born, the one I had hidden for so many years. I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval to be whole, I didn't need applause, I needed very little, my son, who loved me as I am, a cause I believed in, and the courage to finally live for myself. It was already late evening, and the sun was sinking toward the horizon, bathing the house in soft tones of golden tangerine. Everything in the living room shone with this light, the walls, the furniture, the glass panels reflecting the color of the sky. And then the phone rang. Jamie stood on the porch, talking to our neighbor's golden retriever, his voice coming through the waves, light and carefree as a breeze through the grass at the shore, and his laughter filled the space with the scent of pure happiness. For a while, I just stared at the phone screen, at those numbers that were forever etched in my memory, the area code for Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown, the one that should have been home in spirit, but never was. I knew who it was, I didn't even have to guess, my mother. The knowledge froze everything inside me, not from fear, not from pain, but from something more complex, as if an old habit of answering collided with a new skill at silence, at protecting myself. I almost didn't hear the call itself, because the silence I had built with such difficulty was already ringing in my head, like a glass wall between me and everything that hurt. Part of me, the part that was learning to set boundaries, wanted to just let the ringing go away, to let it dissolve into thin air like a raindrop on sand, but the old part, the girl in pajamas, still heard the call in the signal, the one she'd once always answered. I picked up the phone. My mother's voice was weak, almost hesitant, with that soft southern accent that came through especially when she was nervous, like she was hiding behind every sugar and darlin'. "Carolyn, honey," she began, we need help, the bank called, they say we're behind on our house. I don't understand how this could have happened." A pause. "And your father, he didn't take it very well." I stayed silent, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I let her words settle on me like ash, not hot, but still burning. In the past, I would have jumped up and called the bank, closed accounts, transferred money, suppressing the fear and fatigue within me. Back then, I considered it my duty to be the solution to every problem for them, a shield from the world. But now, something in me was different. I sat down at the kitchen table, hugged my cup of now cold tea with my palms, and looked out at the ocean, at its calm surface, which seemed to breathe with me. "Mom," I said softly, but with the firmness that pain had forged in me, "I need you to listen to me, really." There was silence on the other side. I knew she was listening. She could hear the tone of voice, unlike any I'd heard before, and I continued, without stopping, "All these years, I paid for everything, the house, your bills, the car. You and Dad didn't know, and maybe it was easier that way, not to ask questions. I didn't do it because I had to, but because I loved you, because I wanted you to be happy. But after that Thanksgiving, after everything Dad said to me, after you, all of you, made me feel worthless, a burden, a failure, I swallowed, but didn't back down. I didn't feel the same pain anymore. It was gone, and in its place was determination. I realized I deserved more. I deserve respect, Mom, not condescension, not silent disapproval, but respect. I am not a mistake. I built the safety of this entire family. I won't let anyone ever treat me like I've failed them all, when in reality I've kept them all afloat." There was silence on the other side, just her breathing, ragged, contained, and then, very softly, almost like a whisper, easy to miss, "Oh, Caroline," and the sound of sobs, quiet, contained, the kind that don't scream, but leak out, like water through an old dam. I remembered them, the same sobs when Grandma died, the same sobs when I caught my mother in the dark one night, holding a letter my father was tearing to shreds. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, we didn't know, I swear, if I'd known." I shook my head, forgetting for a second that she couldn't see me. "That's exactly it, Mom," I said softly, "you never asked, you didn't want to know, you didn't care about who I was or what I was going through. All that mattered was if I fit into your script, the one where I was always just a little bit different, too independent, too outspoken, too loud. Even after everything, after the sacrifices, after the success, it wasn't enough to make you proud." My voice cracked a little, and I bit my lip for a second, but I didn't let myself slip into weakness. I had to say it, "But you know, Mom, I forgive you, I don't hold a grudge, but things are going to be different now. I'm not your mistake to hide anymore. I'm your daughter, and I'm proud of myself, proud of what I did, proud of how I rose up, and if you want to be a part of my life, you need to see me for who I am." A sob came from the other end of the line, and then the words, taut as a string, "Carolyn, please, let us make this right. Please come home. Your father, he's sorry. I know he won't say it right away, he's stubborn, you know that, but he's sorry. And Lucas, he is too. He said he didn't mean for it to end this way. We need you. I need you." I closed my eyes, I let the words pass through me, and in that moment, through the phone, through the distance, I heard not her plea, but myself, the one I'd hidden for so long, the one who had finally come into the light. I listened to the sound of the surf outside the window, its steady, eternal breathing, and I thought about all those years when I'd tried to fit into a family that never tried to get to know me, never heard my voice, never saw the woman I'd become. The old Carolyn, the one who swallowed her words, bent under other people's expectations, and apologized for her own existence, might have forgiven right then and there, erased the pain like a fingerprint on a fogged window, and ran back, as long as no one was uncomfortable, as long as everyone was smiling at the family table again. But I was no longer that woman. I no longer lived in fear of rejection. I accepted myself. I found peace, not an ephemeral feeling, but a real inner clarity, like the calm morning ocean I saw outside my windows every day. And I was not going to lose that silence, even for the most sincere tears and belated apologies. "Mom," I said, barely breathing, "I love you, I always will, and I will always take care of you, because you are my mother, but I can't go back to the way it was. I can't go back to being a shadow in my own life, pretending I'm unimportant just because it's more convenient for everyone. If you and Dad want me to be a part of your lives, it has to be different. I'm not going to be your secret embarrassment anymore. I'm not going to be talked down to in my own family anymore." There was silence on the other end. I thought for a moment that maybe she'd just hang up, not in anger but in frustration, but then her voice, husky as if picking through a thick web of time, said, "You're right, Carolyn, you're absolutely right. I want you to be happy. I want to know you, the real you. I don't want to lose you again." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but they weren't the kind of tears that come from pain or hurt. They were tears of relief, tears of liberation, the kind that come not because of someone else's fault, but because you finally feel free to be yourself." We hung up, and I sat in silence, watching the sky over the ocean change color, from rich gold to deep indigo, as if the world, step by step, was covering itself with an evening blanket. I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles, but in awareness, about how I'd built Blue Harbor when I had nothing but will and hope, about how I'd given, kept silent, hidden in the corners of other people's gazes, about how long I'd measured my worth by how quiet I could be, how unnoticeably I could dissolve, just to please. And now, for the first time in my life, I saw the truth. My worth was never defined by their words, it was in every step I took in spite, every decision I made alone, every breath I took not for someone else, but for myself. My worth is in a home built on strength, in a son raised with love and respect, in the harbor of hope, where women just like me get a chance to believe in themselves. My worth is the light in their windows, its scholarships, its security, its courage, it's the opportunity to say yes to myself. Every day, I continued to talk to my mother, not often, but consistently. There were many pauses in these conversations. A lot of awkwardness, but also real attempts. And slowly, like ice cracking under the first rays of the spring sun, the relationship with my family began to change. One day, Dad sent a postcard, no pathos, no apologies, no dramatic speeches, just a few words. "We miss you, we're proud of you, even if we don't know how to say it." It was more than I'd ever gotten from him. Lucas called one evening, awkwardly, like he was calling a classmate he hadn't spoken to in a long time. He asked about Jamie. He told me about the case he'd won in court. There were pauses, there were omissions, but they felt real, something that hadn't existed between us before. I didn't expect a miracle from them, I didn't hope for a perfect family, but for the first time, I felt like they saw me, not as a mistake, not as an inconvenience, but as a woman they could be proud of, a woman who had persevered. I returned to Honolulu, not a fugitive, not an exile, but the mistress of my life, Jamie, and I continued our rhythm, our warm, sunny symphony. The mornings began with laughter, the smell of toast in the kitchen, and a salty breeze blowing through the window. Hope Harbor had finally launched its first program, and soon I began receiving letters, real, living letters, from women all over the country. Some wrote with gratitude, some just to say that for the first time they felt seen. I read those letters at night, after Jamie was asleep, and I knew that every step I had taken, no matter how difficult, had led me here. My heart was filled with determination, and my soul with the rare peace that comes when you stop apologizing for your existence. Sometimes, on the quietest evenings, when the world seemed to freeze and only the ocean continued its eternal breathing, I thought back to that Thanksgiving, to the moment when I rose from the table, took my son's hand, and walked out, and to the word I said then, okay. So simple, so light, but it had everything. Sometimes it is the beginning of freedom. A short okay, said not in submission, but in liberation. This word became a promise, to myself, that never again will I live, diminishing for the comfort of others, that I will no longer hide my strength, so as not to hurt someone else's weakness. Now I do not live as someone's disappointment, I live as a woman who once believed in herself and built a world in which she wants to stay, proud, imperfect, but true. I, in my house by the ocean in Honolulu, where the wind sings, the waves whisper, and every sunset reminds, you are self-sufficient, and now I believe in it, for real.